Well, Dave, thank you so much for sitting with me again.
Pleasure.
So basically, Dave, could you give me a quick overview of your career, just for people who don't know you?
That might have started like 15 years ago. Went to school at Interdec in Montreal. Started as an animator at TV International. Went into different studio in Montreal from one project to another. Trying to develop my animation skills. And then I'd say I had my first supervising animator position on a movie that was called Pinocchio 3000, which was the first full length animated feature in Montreal. That was a blast. There was a lot of sleepless night and long hours, but at the time it seems that we barely knew what we were doing, but at the same time we were all in our 20s and working hard, and it seemed that it was almost like the Far West in terms of trying to, how do we do an animated feature. After that, this is when I started to move abroad. So I went in France, worked in Marseille on Dussault for a year, came back to Montreal. After that, I left for Sydney, Australia, worked on Happy Feet. Again, came back to Montreal. After that, went to Double Negative in London. Worked on the Golden Hellboy, Golden Army. This is where I worked with Eamon Butler. And from there, this is when Dreamworks called me to move there maybe 6 months after the end of Hellboy. Move at Dreamworks, and this is where I'd say I really started to learn animation for real. I had already had all the basics of animation, but how to go from creating really good animation to great animation. Worked there for 4 years. I worked on Shrek 4, Kung Fu Panda 2, Puss in Boots, a little bit of Madagascar, and finally the Croods. On the Croods, I was responsible for most of the creature animation that was there. That was a blast, and from there, that's when I had the opportunity to move back to Montreal at Eidos Montreal as a cinematic director. So I always also had the responsibility of being an animation director. So since then, it's been 3 years now, and worked on a project at first that's been put on the shelf. After that, I started a new cinematic department there. And we just shipped our first project, which was Rise of the Tomb Raider. Produced an hour and a half of cinematic for that, both as animation director, lead cinematic, and directing with the actors and all that. So that's it's been a good ride so far.
A nice first project to work in games.
Yeah. Yeah.
And what attracted you to do feature animation?
I said there was definitely not a master plan behind it. It's just how it happened. But usually when you try for quality and you can show quality work, it will slowly lead you to be able to work on feature length movies. What I really like about animated feature is that you have time to develop a character compared to much shorter project that I did before that. You barely don't have time to develop a character. You do it very rapidly. You have barely no pre-production. You do the project and then you're done. You have to move to something else. When you work on a feature, you have time to develop all those characters, not only for character design, but animation and all that. So you get to really know those characters, which means that mid-end of production, you intuitively, you know those characters. You know how they would behave, and it's almost like they become this character that almost exists for real in your mind that you have to animate. So I really like this long journey to being attached to a project.
And you were talking about the fact that when you started to work at Dreamworks, you finally understood how to create great animation.
Mm-hmm.
What defines great animation for you?
To me, in the beginning, what I see now that I was able to do is well executed animation, which means that the characters were moving in an appealing way. There was the motion was great, the locomotion was great, but in the end, the entertainment wasn't always there. So that was for me the learning curve of how can I make the audience? How can I touch the audience? I know that I can make something that will say, oh yeah, that's nice, but how can I touch them? And this is when you really have to dive deeply into knowing your character and knowing why does it matter what I'm doing right now? How is it gonna be original? How is it gonna really be in sync with what the story is trying to tell at that point? And that's a danger, especially in production. You get your shots approved because production has to move on. But if you never ask yourself, is it really the best thing that I could have done? Is there any other way that the audience could have been more entertained? You won't progress to the next level. So I'd say for me it was really the fact to be in dailies, show my animation, have it approved by having no reaction from the rest of the crew, and then right after that there's another animator that would show an animation that would be as well executed, but everybody would laugh in the room and say, okay, what is making people laugh? What is the secret recipe? And you realize that it's much more than a recipe. There's a lot of thought process behind it. So I'd say it's really what you put on screen, not just how you execute it.
And after a few projects, you became a lead on the creature, on the Croods.
Mm-hmm.
You had to create really weird creatures sometimes,
yeah,
but with persona and character.
Yeah.
What was your approach in taking those creative choices?
Yeah, I'd say definitely at first the reason why I stepped in very early on the project, I've been able to do some tests with those creatures. And fortunately for me, Chris Sanders really liked, and James Baxter as well. They really liked my work. There was already creature lead, but he's been promoted to another project, so there was a void there. So it was circumstances of I'm able to produce work that is really entertaining for the director and my animation supervisor, and there's a place to fill there. So this is how it came about. As for how to develop those personality, to me it's really to bring back to the essence of what is this character, and really to simplify this. So one of the example, the turkey fish was one of the creature that we had there, and again, a very colorful creature, looked like a mix of a very big turkey but a long neck, a beak that resembled like a crocodile and a fish. And at some point you have something, you have no reference whatsoever how to animate this. So this is when I say, okay, well, let me do some, not even background research, but how to create some kind of background, because I need to build myself a sandbox, because otherwise I'm going to go in every different direction. And how am I going to build this sandbox? Well, I'm going to find a personality. So, okay, it's a turkey fish. It's probably a fish that kind of evolved into a turkey, but is in the middle of his, of the transformation in terms of evolution. So, all right. So probably he still swims very, very well in water, but when he gets on land, he might be a little bit clumsy. That kind of makes sense with his evolution. But at the same time in the story, he's chasing the Croods, so he's a predator. So, all right, so he's a mean predator, but he's clumsy at the same time. Okay, that's interesting. Let's do a few tests. And the test that I was doing is getting out of the water. He's swimming very well. Then he gets on land, and whoop, and then he starts to slide on the side, and then he's trying to chase something, and he just keeps falling and falling and falling, and that made the directors laugh. So I was like, okay, I have the personality of this character. He's going to be very mean, very dangerous, but clumsy at the same time. We have a contrast there. This is good. And basically it was to repeat the same formula for other characters. So what is the main traits of personality? And often it was coming to two different traits of personality that were contradicting each other.
Simplifying the character to a point that you always know what to do in your posing.
Well, especially for characters that don't exist in real life, you have to give yourself guidelines. Otherwise, not even for yourself, but when you have to help other animator to be able to go in the same direction, you have to be very clear in terms of what this character is. Otherwise, each animator is going to go in its own direction, and each individual animation might be great, but as a whole, you don't create personality. So that's a challenge. So it's for yourself, but it's to be able to supervise others as well.
Great. And what made you decide to do a little career change and work in games?
For me, there was two things. There was the opportunity to go from an animator's position to go more into directing. That seemed very appealing to me because I've been doing, videos on my own, been doing music videos, some commercials as well as all that. So to be able to do more than just motion and character, but especially with cinematography, the camera, and all that. And another big motivation for me was to be able to bring what I learned from feature animation into video game. Feature animation, I felt at that time kind of plateaued a little bit. Some of my favorite animated film are now dating 10 years ago. So it seems that, yes, it's still evolving, but it's evolving very slowly now because of the technology and all of that. As for video game, it's still an opportunity to... The technology is evolving so rapidly. The team, often because the technology wasn't available for animators to create great performance, they didn't develop that skill. So to bring the facial animation and performance skills to those teams, because now we do have the technology and we do have all the controllers in the face to be able to create genuine emotion. But it's one thing to have the tools, it's another thing to have the knowledge to be able to use them properly. So it was this feeling of I might have something to bring to that industry, or at least on the project that I'll be able to work on.
Cool. And the transition between feature animation and game animation must not have been going so smoothly. What were the hurdles that you did not anticipate?
Yeah, well, at first I was not directly in charge of cinematic. I was in charge of gameplay animation as well. And I'd say one of the first hurdle was definitely the amount of animation that we had to create. So you say, okay, we need a set of, I'd say, 500 animation per character. We're gonna have 20 character, and we're gonna have this and this, and you're like, okay, we're gonna have to create how many clips of animation, and then you look at the size of your team. That's the first challenge right there. The sheer amount of data that you will have to produce with your team. So that was a first challenge. After that, obviously, it's a medium that is very interactive. So it's not, in feature, it's often very passive. You look in the screen, is that entertaining? Yes, okay, let's approve it and let's move on. Video game, you'll have to test it. Does it respond well? Do I have a visceral responsiveness when I'm doing this move and this move and this move? You try it, doesn't work, you go back, you tweak your animation, you integrate it again, you try it again. So it's more, the difference between watching your animation and playing your animation is two completely different ballpark. As for cinematic, that was very different. For the cinematic, first of all, we were dealing with motion performance capture, which means that it all comes from the shoot with the actors. So you need to be prepared and ready, because whatever you get out of those shoots, this is what you'll have to work with. And if it's bad, then you'll know that you'll have a lot of catch up with ADR, voice over it, and maybe redo some mocap on your own to compensate for that. So that's one thing. The other thing was realistic animation. It's one thing on the Croods to create appealing and entertaining animation with characters that don't exist. It's another thing when you have to create realistic animation with humans that are very, very realistic. It's unforgiving. I mean, anyone can look at a performance that is not really genuine or that is not moving well, and they will point it right away. Compared to something that is much more cartoony and simplified, that you can go all over the top and you have just a cool motion and good ideas and entertaining values in there, and it's gonna work. So there was a lot going on, especially with facial animation, to study just how the eyes are moving, how the lids are following the eye globe, how the brows are connected with the lids, how the cheeks are connected with the low lids, the lip sync, how every muscle is connected to each other to be able to properly iterate on the rig to allow us to have the right tools. But after that, how to make sure to share the knowledge to all of the animation teams, so they are able to spot, oh, okay, the lid is not folding properly, the eye here, so I'm gonna fix it here. Or it seems that the character is dead a little bit, so I'm gonna add a little bit of life here with a little blink there and a few eye darts over there. So you get to a few millimeters here and there to be able to hit, okay, now we have something that is accurate in terms of locomotion and genuine in terms of performance.
Wow. Working with the actors on the mocap shoot, what was your responsibility? What were you looking for?
We were shooting at Digital Domain. There was a talent director that was coming from Digital Domain that was in charge of, he was the one that was speaking directly to the actors. My responsibility was I was representing the team, so I was making sure that they understood exactly what is the blocking of the scene, what is the choreography, why we need to start there, what is each in the storyboard, what part is important and where they can improvise. If we have a big sequence, where we can chop the sequence, because we know that for us we'll be able to easily reassemble those parts. A lot of time, so it was to explain all that to both the talent director and the actors as well, and a lot of time the actors would have questions that were related to what is the level just before, what cinematic. Obviously we were shooting in different orders, so sometimes we were shooting something that has nothing to do with the sequence that we were shooting after, so it was just to be able to give enough information to everyone so they are able to do their job properly. And obviously at the end of the day, when we had shot everything, we were looking at all the different takes, and we would select, the team would select which takes we were going to take, which one are the best to put in the game. So it's, and the biggest challenge, I would say, once you explain all that, once you rehearsal a little bit, you go through the sequence, and so you shoot the sequence, they say cut, and then everyone is looking at you and like, okay, what didn't work out, this didn't work, this and this, and you just need to focus on a few things and say, okay, you missed your mark over here, this beak was not long enough, and this part we didn't really, I know that the audience is not going to understand exactly what is going on because it wasn't clear the relation between the two characters, and you misspell his name over here, so basically you just strike. So as we were shooting, it's to be 150% focused on what is going on and being able to catch every details and be able to filter those details as well, because there are some details that don't really matter and there's others that are essential to be able to have a sequence. So really be in charge of explaining everything, making sure that everyone on the set, especially the actors, had everything, all the knowledge they had to get to properly perform the scene, and to be a filter as we're shooting to flag stuff as we're moving along during the shoot.
You've had quite an extensive career. Probably you had some ups and downs. What was your biggest obstacle?
Biggest obstacle. Well, I'd say definitely when I was working in feature animation, the fact to not be someone that had a solid background in drawing made it more difficult to me to get clear silhouette and posing early on. Over time, I've been able to overcome this obstacle, but even in the last few years at Dreamworks, it still took me 3 or twice the amount of time that other animator just to have appealing in posing and nice silhouette. Fortunately, I was fast enough in all the resin polishing to take back this time, but that's definitely a ball and chain that I drag early on.
And on the contrary, what was your proudest moment, your greatest victory?
Well, there was many, because each time, for me, evolution is not a constant curve. You evaluate very rapidly and then you plateaued and then you evaluate so you have many of those moments those eureka moments that it feels like, oh my God, I discovered this new thing, this is amazing. And then after a few weeks, months, you just take it for granted and it's just part of your trick bag and you move forward. I'd say definitely when I started to feel that I went from being able to produce good animation to great animation. I don't remember exactly when that was, but probably I feel that on Kung Fu Panda 2 is one of the moments that I started to Well, actually, I realized it by the shots that were given to me. When I started to realize that, oh my God, those are shots that usually are given to the top animators. This is when I say, okay, I think I'm doing a few things right there. So that was a little victory for me to have some secondary animation, secondary shots to great shots. So that was definitely I was definitely very happy with it because there was a lot of work put into being able to get there. On the Croods as well. On the Croods, it's probably the first time that I was able to really entertain the audience with my animation. So, and this is something that I worked on for maybe 3-4 years at Dreamworks before being able to get there. Otherwise, if I just come back a few years when I was at Double Negative, working on Hellboy, started as the, I don't want to say junior animator, but I just came as one of the other animating background stuff. And after 3 months, I've been given the entire one big part of the final sequence with the Golden Army, and I was responsible for the entire sequence as well. And having the trust from Eamon as well, having a great pitch from Guillermo del Toro to lead me exactly where I had to go, and work my ass off on it for 2 months. It was crazy shot with camera going all over the place with all those robots fighting each other, and to give my final animation, and both Eamon and Guillermo were like, wow, that's great, approved, let's move on. So that was definitely another moment I was like, okay, this is by far the most complicated animation that I ever had to do in one of the most stressful moments of a big important production at the end of the production with people that I knew that had very high standards of quality. So just to be able to please them with my work was a big satisfaction for me.
It must have been an amazing feeling.
Yeah.
How do you manage to stay positive and keep the motivation going?
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any tricks, tips?
Keep the motivation going, especially for animators. That's a tricky one because it's it definitely takes passion, dedication. Those animation takes a lot of time, and I think what is hard for us is that we constantly have feedback, and if you take feedback negatively, it seems that every day they're gonna point at what you're doing wrong, and you're doing this wrong, and this wrong, and this wrong, and this wrong. It's true for our students that are learning animation, but it's true as well when you're into production. You're often just celebrated when you have your shots approved, which happens once, but you've had so many notes before that. So it's the feeling that you're always underwater trying to reaching out, and especially when you're into splining in the middle of your animation, like, oh my God, how am I ever going to be able to get the final? And you always end up being able to do it. Animation, I often make the parallel with surfing. It's a 98% effort and 2% reward. Just to be able to get to the wave and have it and be able to be up on the board, and then you have 5, 6, 7 seconds of, oh my God, I'm on it, and then you fall back and you have to start over again. So I'd say how to be motivated is to really, again, dive into the subject, and if you feel that you're competent at what you're doing and you have all the information to be able to create something that the audience is going to be able to relate to and be entertained by, you have the feeling that you're going in the right direction. If you have the feeling that you have no idea of what you're doing, it's usually the time that you start to be depressed. Now, it can be because you have a supervisor, again, that doesn't give you any support or any help and no trust and all that, but it's often coming from yourself. You think that we're all often very insecure about our work, and if we believe that we have no idea into what we're doing, we're going to be even more insecure, and we start to be scared and then demotivated and all of that. So make sure that you are well prepared, well documented, and you know the subject of your animation. That will really help you to, convince yourself that you're worth it and to bring it to the end. But Another thing which is very simple is that have other project on the side. Either you're doing video, or you're doing sports, music, or have other passions on the side. Because if you just focus on your work, on animation, at some point you don't see clearly. So you have to take your mind to other places, and that goes with doing other stuff. Again, whether it's photography or drawing or anything, just refuel the inspiration and the motivation with other medium and come back to your shots.
Yeah. And on a final note, what is creativity for you?
Creativity for me is really to be able to let your mind come with original idea. Be creative, just see something, let your mind imagine something that doesn't exist and execute it. Put it on paper, put it on the screen, put it on the stage, record it, whatever it is. But it's really the ability to create something out of nothing. And this is usually whether it's when you daydream, when you're in the shower, whether you're brainstorming with people, but create something out of nothing, and then the ability to execute it.
Great. Thank you so much for sitting with me. It was
Merci.
really nice.